So I'm going to start the meeting. We haven't heard from Vice Chair Benoit whether he was coming or not, and then Supervisor Rutherford was not going to be attending. So why don't we start the meeting? We'll start off with introductions. We'll start off with Felipe.
Felipe Aguirre from Maywood, California.
Paul Avila, Paul Avila Associates.
David Rothbard, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
Jeff Blake, Metal Finishers Association and Small Business Alliance.
Eddie Marquez, Altair Paramount.
Nancy Feldman, Counsel's Office.
Todd, you want to introduce yourself before we go?
Todd Campbell, Clean Energy.
Derek Alatorre, South Coast. Day, you want to introduce yourself? Ricardo.
So why not South Coast? David Szymanski, consultant board member Katsiari.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We'll go to that was, are there any opening remarks from any of the members? Seeing none. Okay, we'll go to agenda item number 2. And agenda item number 2 is approval of the October 13, 2017 meeting minutes. Can I get, okay. I've got a motion from Jeff
Second.
Blake. Second from Todd Campbell. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, that is approved. We'll go to item number 3, which is review of follow-up, action items. So the first one was check with staff as to when a presentation on Rule 219 can be agendized. It'll be agendized in 2018. That was, I believe, Rita Loof. The next one is staff to contact Mr. DeWitt, John DeWitt, to discuss service station models. Staff did get in contact with Mr. DeWitt, and Mr. DeWitt did not have any further questions. The next item is to agendize a presentation on cap and trade, and more like a cap and trade 101, and we will agendize that in 2018. Next action item, provide the legislation summary to the LGSBA members, and that was emailed on October 25th this year. Thank God I don't read all my staff's notes because they say 2018. Sure, Eddie, you have a question?
I just really wanted to thank staff for sending that digest, if you will, or spreadsheet. It wasn't a spreadsheet, but the itemization of all the legislative activity. That was very helpful. So thank you very much.
That was from Philip Crabb, one of my staff members. Thank you, Philip. Next item was to agendize a presentation on pyramid streamlining. That's going to be done today by Dr. Tassopoulos. Next action item, excuse me, agendize, excuse me. I was up in Lake Tahoe, so I'm not used to this dirty air up here. Agendize a presentation on AQMP facility modernization white paper. We're going to need to verify with staff when that can be presented. And the last action item is to agendize a presentation on Rule 1110.2, and that was, I believe, with you, Dave? Yeah, and Dave met with, and a few others met with Tracy Goss to discuss the plan. And at this time, we're not going to give a presentation on that, but we will keep that in mind.
You're going to have a presentation at the end of the month?
So right now, staff is not recommending one, but when we're ready to present, Tracy knows that he has to come to LGSB also.
Understood. Okay.
So that takes care of item number 3 on the agenda. Next is the, I call him the Zorbo the Great, Lockheed Tassopoulos. Give a presentation on permit application backlog reduction report.
All right. Good morning. It's still morning, right? Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. So, almost a year and a quarter ago, we started our backlog reduction effort in this agency. So I gave last Friday the end of the year report to the board. I'll be happy to share the same report with you guys because there are some really good news that we are very proud about that we'd like to share with you. So, we focused all our energy this past year in implementing the backlog reduction plan that we had put together last October and presented to the board last October 2016. And you may recall that particular plan that I presented to this group almost a year ago. We gave ourselves a 2-year horizon to reduce the pending application backlog by 50%. So when we started back in June 2016, we were at 7,400. So we're trying to have this in a 2-year time frame. And I'm happy to share with you that we did meet our targets basically for this past year, and we improved our production rates and exceeded our goals and objectives that we established for this year. So basically, by optimizing our assets and implementing all the measures that we included in the plan, we managed, actually this is in our data presentation, in 5 quarters, we managed to reduce the permit backlog by 41%. We worked smarter, we worked harder, we worked longer, we brought stuff in during the weekends. We did have them work overtime on a voluntary basis. And we managed to reduce things by 41%. We were supposed to reduce them by the end of the first year only by 25%. So we managed to hit the 41% mark. And we managed to do it at 50% of the allocated budget that we had set aside for OT purposes. So it does come with some savings. So in terms of production rates, if you go back to the pre-backlog reduction time and you start from 2015 and you look at 6 months increments and you compare the applications received versus application processed with the green and the yellow bar respectively, they're pretty much at par. And you look at the rest of the year and the first part of 2016, they were pretty much equivalent, which wasn't terribly conducive to reducing the backlog. But the moment we started our backlog reduction efforts, we managed to reverse those, and the application process, as you are going to see, started far exceeding the application received, which has contributed to us reducing the pending application count. The targets that we had inherited from the past fiscal year for total permits process of 7,000 and the 1,800 for permits to construct or PCs issues, we managed to exceed those by 38 and 32% respectively. And all in all, once one looks at where we were supposed to be in the first year, because of all these productivity improvements, we managed to exceed our quarterly goals for each and every of the past 5 quarters. So we are way ahead of the curve. We are 81, 82% of the way towards meeting our 50% reduction target. So I'm hoping by the end of the fiscal year, which is end of June, and hopefully a lot sooner than that, we'll be able to hit our 100% target figure.
Paul has a question.
Yes, Paul.
Lucky, I had the good fortune to be here when you made your last presentation.
Yes.
And got kind of a little bit roughed up a little bit, for lack of better terms. But I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One, prior to you taking over, how did it get so bad? Was it just neglect? That's my first question. The second question would be, and you did a good analysis, so did Junior, did all the analysis frontwards, backwards, inside out, upside
Right.
down, about cost factors,
Yes.
return on hiring other staff, bringing people in, all these good things.
Right.
And that's wonderful. But eventually, you just had staff work overtime and you
Yes.
brought on the levels,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
But how did it get so bad in the first place? That's all.
I like not to dwell in the past.
That's a lo-
and
that-
I
that's a
like
loaded
to
question
look
there,
at
Paul.
the future, right? And so long as the numbers are trending in the right direction, I'm a happy guy. But essentially, the key thing is to work very closely with staff, have accountability. From the line engineer, if I can use that term, all the way up to the DEO. So long as you bring that accountability issue up and they understand that there are expectations, and that their work, their good work is being appreciated, people do respond. And of course, there are a lot of things that you can do to streamline the processing, so you got to do both. And this next slide is basically an example in that direction. By working hard and longer hours, definitely we are making an improvement. But ultimately, in order to make those gains permanent, we need to modernize our permit processing process. And to the extent we can automate, we would like to automate. So what we started doing was working with our IM staff to develop online permitting tools where an applicant can, rather than bringing his paper application here and submitting it to the district, can get into his computer at his workplace, at his home, at his leisure, fill out the application, and so long as he fills it out completely, have the computer program do the processing and receive the permit online by pushing the print button, in his computer. So we have, I'm happy to share with you, we have our first prototypes. We are working on 3 very simple systems: the dry cleaners, the gas stations, and the automotive spray booths. We already got our module ready for dry cleaners that we share thanks to Bill. Actually, he got us together with the Small Business Alliance, got us together with the Korean Dry Cleaning Association and the California Dry Cleaning Association. We presented this tool to them, and we solicited active volunteers. And today we are sitting down with 2 of them, actually. So you can literally sit on your computer, and in 20 minutes, you'll be able to get your permit without having to interface with us.
Yeah, see, I like to hear good news, and it's, as long as we had a happy ending,
Yeah.
everybody's happy.
Yes.
It's just, let's try not to fall into this
I-
pit again.
And I wholeheartedly agree with you. So we got the dry cleaners ready. I think we are going to go full production by December. So we are at the last stages of beta testing it in real world conditions. We got the prototypes for gas stations and automotive spray booths that we are testing internally, and hopefully those will go public first quarter, sometime during the first quarter of next year. And we already converted 3 of our permit forms to electronic format, specifically 400A, 400PS, and 400 SQL. And as we move forward, we want to convert all our forms to electronic forms so that we won't be able to develop online permitting tools for all the processes, because some of the processes are way too complex to develop the actual computer language, logic, if you will. But at a minimum, even for those that we cannot develop actual online tools, we would like to get rid of the paper forms altogether and revert to graduate to an electronic application submittal process.
David, you have a question?
Hopefully, a quick question.
Okay.
So, Lucky, you and I have talked about just as far as streamlining the process so your staff can be much more efficient and the permittee is going to know what they're in for and know what the process is. So sometimes when we go and get a permit, from our side of the table, it can be a lot of haggling. So kind of my idealized process would be the applicant comes in and knows exactly what the rules are, what they have to do, what backed is or minor source backed, whatever the rule is, they know what it is going in to avoid the haggling.
Right.
So one question would be, is there a permitting policy that you go by? Remember in the past, Mosen had provided some internal policy memos, but I was looking at that the other day, and there's seems like there's a lot that may be available that would help people understand the permitting process that's not up on the website. So that'd be one question of, is there something available that would help folks? And two, via permit streamlining, can we continue to kind of establish a process where everyone knows what they're in for and there's more consistency?
Yeah. No, these are very good questions, and the answer is yes, 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 and yes. There are a lot of policies that it's one of the commitments that we made that we are going to put them on the public domain so that everybody knows what we are, how we are being governed internally, so that there is full transparency. But there are also some policies that we are working currently that we hope that will actually further enhance this process. For instance, one of the policies that we are working, and we'll be happy to share this with you guys, is to the extent we can, to collapse the two-step permitting process into one. As you know, when you are installing new equipment or a new process, you submit first a permit to construct, we review it, we give you the green light, we give you the permit to construct, then you take a few months to, sometimes years, to install, you source test, then you submit the results back to us, and then you get your permit to operate. So what we are trying to do is, to the extent we can, to collapse those into one process. In fact, we are testing that idea in a number of different applications, but the actual policy will be coming out very soon. Now, we may not be able to do it with everything. Controversial projects, I mean, Paramount comes to mind, you know, with the nickel plating and stuff. We may still have to go the two-step process just to make sure, you know, everybody stays on the right side of the curve. But for the cookie cutter type of instruments where, you know, we can standardize the permit conditions, we want to go with a two-step approach. The other thing is we are looking at our public notification policies. You know, there are certain applications where we are required to issue a public notice even for, if you have an infinitesimal amount of emissions, even one molecule of emissions, you know, especially if there are toxic emissions, will trigger, or if you are close to a school, will trigger a public notification, which we think, you know, it's always good to notify the public, but we got to bring some sanity to the process. I mean, we got to establish some de minimis level. Anyhow, so that's another thing. As we move forward, what we would like to do, and I know we are working with the sanitation districts in standardizing some of the conditions, but we would like to expand that not just to you guys, but to others as well, because others are pretty much, you know, other applications or industries are in the same boat. They would like to see standardization of those permits. The online tools, to the extent we can develop them, actually address that problem, because I'll borrow your term, the haggling doesn't exist. You don't even interface with us. So long as you stay below the thresholds. If you are, again, close to a school and you need public notification, even the online tool will revert back to us. But at least to the extent, you know, you are staying below the radar or whatever those bright lines are, you won't need to interface with us and text all those that haggling around.
Right.
So
I was sort of alluding to the just policy, or just something that everyone knows. Here's the process is to get more consistency. And I think the online tools are awesome. The demonstration you had for the dry cleaners that I saw was great. Be wonderful to expand that beyond that.
Yeah.
Certain thing, my members of SCAP will give me an example of, hey, I got a biofilter at one facility, a biofilter at another facility, same exact time frame, same exact permit engineer, but yet you get different permit conditions. Things like that seem like a no-brainer. It should be the same. You should expect the same conditions. And that's the kind of thing that I scratch my head when I hear that kind of feedback.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, you need to know, I mean, I need to know the details to be able to give you an intelligent response, because, the biofilters, I mean, on the surface, it's a no-brainer. It should be the same. You know, often, you know, the boiler is being brought to us as an example, and how come some of the boilers, you know, all of the boilers don't have, you know, the same conditions. And sometimes the application itself of the boiler necessitates different sets of conditions depending on what the fuel is, if it's a natural gas-fired boiler or if it's a landfill gas or digester gas fired boiler. But those are, I'm hoping, the exceptions rather than the rule. To the extent, there are similar equipment, they should have the same permit conditions. One other thing that we hope that we can do is, and maybe we can start doing it on a slowly this next year, is to put together example of permit evaluations for different processes, and perhaps we can start with the most common processes and put it out in the public domain so that they know what kind of input parameters go into evaluating that particular permit. So all of our engineers will be looking at the same, document, and you guys from outside will be looking at the same document. So hopefully, we'll find that common language that we are trying to establish.
Last one, because we're talking about permit streamlining.
Yeah.
Do we have a date for the next meeting?
We should. No, we don't have a date, but I want to have one, let's say, maybe right after Thanksgiving, before we get into the Christmas
my members
holidays.
for questions to pose to you, so I'll have some.
Yeah. We want to have that because by then, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. There are a couple of things that we want to share with you guys. The Title V issues, certain guidance that is coming on the change of ownership from our legal team. And if we can, if we have one of the other two online tools, the automotive spray booths or the gas stations, we would like to start, introducing those to you guys as well and get your feedback. So just quickly to close this presentation, because this is my last slide. So clearly we have a pretty good momentum going with the backlog reduction, so we want to continue that and cross that finish line. And definitely we want to go forward with our next phase of online tool development. In fact, Justin Amir was telling me, my deputy in the administrative committee this morning, they approved the budget for the second phase, so we'll be adding other equipment, all the registrations, the Rule 222 filings, they are all going to be going the electronic filing, and hopefully at the end of this effort, we'll have all our forms in an electronic format. So we are very excited about it. So as I mentioned in my previous slides, even if we cannot develop online tools for all the hundreds of different processes that we have, we would like to migrate to the electronic filing, electronic permit application submittal process, and get rid of the paper applications altogether. So last year, we focused on the quantity. We want to bring the numbers down, and we've accomplished that. We are going to continue doing this for a while, but we want to also now start focusing on quality, perhaps looking at the timing issues, how long it takes to issue the permit. Can we beat even our own newly established standards, and focus on and hopefully improve the customer service and customer satisfaction. And last but not least, we started a program where we started recognizing staff, the top performing staff. So when we completed our first fiscal year, we look back and we have 10 teams, 10 permitting teams engaged in the permit issuance, and we selected our top performers and key contributors to our success from each and every of the team. And because we think, well, they're going above the call of duty sometimes, many of them, and they need to be recognized. And we are planning to institutionalize this and do this periodically so that they get a pat in the back. And with that, that's all I got. And hopefully by next time I meet with you guys, I'll be able to tell you we are done,
Okay, Bill, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess that maybe I have more of a comments than anything else. I keep thinking that, if you don't know your past, you're bound to relive it in the future. And in answer to Paul's question, this isn't the first time we've had a backlog. We had one, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago when Carol Coy was here, and that was about a year's backlog too. So it has happened once before. Let's all hope that it doesn't happen again. Of course, we didn't have an electronic system here either at that time. At the earlier meeting this morning, I noticed that with the when they were talking about the budget, the admin committee members expressed some concern over the amount of overtime that you all have been using, and how it has impinged, I guess, on vacation time for some employees. So I'm just wondering if your 50% of budget is accurate, or is that's just a rough number now to be finalized next year sometime. I don't know. I know Jill was in the same meeting I was.
Yeah. Let me clarify with the 50%. No, this is a very good point that you are raising. Actually, the accumulated vacation time, comp time is a very real issue for us, for my department, because last year when we started this effort, basically we told staff by the Christmas holidays, guys, we got to keep the vacation short, okay? We didn't say that you cannot take time off, but we tried to shorten those vacation times because we needed them here to work. And it worked great for us. We produced. The unintended consequences, well, the time that they did not use, they got to accumulate it. And now it's accumulating even more because we are continuing the effort this year. So at some point, they'll have to take the time, and you don't want them to get penalized and lose that time. Right. So this is why we are going to the board and ask their authorization to allow staff to carry over that accumulated time yet for another year so that our staff don't get penalized. And we are 100% supportive of that.
And I recall in October of 2016, when you made this presentation to the board out in Riverside,
yes,
you gave them an estimate of $12 million to do this. To reduce
that was the expensive route. On this one, in addition, what we had, I don't have the exact number, so I don't want to mislead you, but what we had said for the track that we opted to take was to rely on our staff and not necessarily hire external engineers as we did in the early 2000s, which was a very expensive proposition. And to be frank with you, between us, it did reduce the backlog, but there were a lot of errors that were introduced in the applications, and some of the errors we are still trying to fix. So it wasn't the most desirable outcome, but nevertheless, they managed to reduce the backlog at the time down to 6,500. Amir, am I remembering it right? Around there, the thereabouts. Okay. Well, so with this one, we decided to rely on our internal staff, but we were going to be working harder and longer through overtime, voluntary as well as mandatory if necessary. And we had set aside, I believe, $2 million per year for the overtime. What I was claiming with the 50%, we only use 50% of the $2 million.
Okay, well, regardless of the money, $2 million is to me still a lot of money. But with the backlog being what it is, and the time that our people, the regulated community, has to wait for permits. Even though I understand you're a candidate for Employee of the Year for this, for the good job that you and your team are doing.
Are you appointing me, or
I'll be one to nominate
the award is
because I haven't heard that before. Is it something new?
I'll be one to nominate you. Sure, we'll be happy to do that because it's very costly for us. We've just had, a 32% fee increase for Title V facilities. Yes. All the costs that I see coming out now because of AB 617, which is law, Right. And I, for one, and I know I'm not the only one that fears, more fee increases in the upcoming years. That we need to make sure, we collectively need to make sure, staff and the regulated community, that we don't have any more of these backlogs
Right,
for
right.
whatever reason. So anything that we can do
Yes.
to help, with whether it's input or something other than that,
Yes.
I know that we'll be happy to do that, but staff really needs to make sure that we don't have a repeat of this again.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, how can anyone argue with that, with what you just said? All I can tell you is right now, our pending application count is at 4,200, which is the lowest it has been in the last 30 plus years. And I'm stopping at 30 years because we don't have any statistics that go beyond that. So, with some accountability, we should be able to maintain that, and hopefully this nightmare will never resurface again. And the other thing that I'm sharing with my staff, and I can share it with you too, it's not only good customer service to turn those permits out quickly to the applicants, but it also makes a lot of business sense for us as well, because even though we spend some money on the OT side, we recognize revenues that otherwise we couldn't recognize because we process more permits, more applications, close to $4 million. So which ultimately reverts back, to the general budget, as a I don't want to say bonus, but as a help, as an assistance to the bottom line of our budget.
Yes. Hey, Lucky. Going back to David's question on the policy memos, I recall at one point on the old website before this iteration of the website that's currently available, they were posted all the way back to 1990. But they might be on the website, but they are not really accessible. Would you
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
having like
Yeah.
a quick link to the engineering policy memos?
I'm a little bit hesitant because, I'm a little bit surprised, to be frank with you, because a few weeks back when I was looking at the website, they were there. So I don't know whether something happened, in the last few weeks as we were trying to move to the new website, and whether we lost them or not, but I'll go back and check.
confirm
They
it.
should be there.
It's still there.
Okay.
It's just you need to know where to look.
Okay. All right.
It's the same thing we've seen, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have all the policies.
Okay.
Hence what I was asking for.
All right. Okay, so that's good. Thank you. I'm breathing a lot easier now. But at some point we are going to reconfigure that website, because especially with the introduction of these online tools, we'll have to go through some pretty thorough overhaul on the looks of the permitting side, and announce the availability of this dual track. You want to do the paper application, you have the ability to do that. If you want to do this online tool, you'll have that available as well. So that we are going to go through some overhaul, and we'll see whether we can more prominently display those. And I'll be open to suggestions, frankly, because ultimately you guys are our customers, our stakeholders, so wherever you want to see them, and wherever you want us to place them, we'll place them there.
And Rita, just want to bring up, because you late your action item regarding update or presentation on Rule 219. It's not going to make it to December, but it'll be sometime in 2018. Okay. Okay, any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Dr. Zorba. Lucky. Next, we're going to have Tracy Goss. Tracy's going to be giving a presentation on Rule 415, odors from rendering operations. Encourage you all to visit Bandini Boulevard in the city of Vernon to get a real sense of those odors on a very hot summer day. No longer there. I think it's
Yeah,
gone.
it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. True.
Well, thank you, Derek. I think one of the reasons Derek wanted to make sure I went after Lucky was to make sure everybody ate before we start talking about rendering of animals and our rule that was adopted by the governing board last week. Thank you very much. Just in the way of background, many of you may know we started this rulemaking process back in spring of 2014, and staff had worked on the rule for about a year and a half. We were getting really close to coming to a final proposal. We had circulated our CEQA document. We're working on preparation of response to comments and putting together our final package. But rulemaking was suspended in the fall of 2015. Staff was needed to work on the AQMP and some other resource needs from that time. But back in September 1st at the governing board meeting, the governing board, with the recommendation of Dr. Burt, directed staff to finish what we started and to go back and finish the rendering rule, that it was long overdue in their opinion, and it was something that we needed to accomplish to benefit the community. So that's what staff did. So we came back in 2 months with a finished product. I do want to highlight that the rendering industry does provide a beneficial service. I mean, a lot of people don't know, and particularly a lot of young people don't know, that when you go to the store, the meat that's on the counter, that's in the meat market or in the refrigerated areas, doesn't just appear there by magic. The majority of all that meat that's there is processed and made available through operations that are located in our jurisdiction. And with all those animals that are being processed, we cannot landfill the materials, the bone, the fat, and some of the other things that are inedible that come from that. We can't landfill that unless there's a case of an emergency. So they do provide a beneficial service. They get grease that comes out of that. Some of that grease is refined to the point that it's used for makeup. You get tallow, you get pet food, you also get biofuels. And these guys also process kitchen trap grease, which is some of the odorous trap grease that comes from restaurants. One of the things a lot of people don't know is back in the late 1800s and actually kind of before that, one of the primary industries here in this region was the hide and tallow trade. So there's a long history of the rendering here in the South Coast Air Basin. But one of the things about rendering is that those odors are very distinctive. They can travel. It's not something that you're going to confuse with a diesel truck and a lot of other different odors that you might smell. But what we have right now in our jurisdiction is we have 5 facilities. 4 of those are located in Vernon, and one of those is on the edge of Vernon and the city of Los Angeles. But they're all really clustered close together. The issue of odors was brought up as one of the top 10, or actually top 5 priorities of the Clean Communities Plan for Boyle Heights. At the time, and we currently don't have any odor reduction measures for rendering facilities. Rule 402 is really our only mechanism, but because of the location of these facilities in such close proximity, and I'll show you a map, it was really difficult to trace any of these odors back to a specific facility. So there's been very few NOVs in the last 15 years. I think there's only been one that's been issued where we've had hundreds and hundreds of complaints. So we're putting this rule together. But one of the things we did is we went and looked back at what other states were doing. We traveled to Florida. We looked at other countries. We looked at these other states like Utah, South Carolina, Mississippi, New York. And they have the type of odor reduction requirements that we put in Rule 415. So we're really asking them to do what is being done elsewhere, not only elsewhere within the country in the state of California, but by also some of the facilities that we have here that have facilities in other parts of the country are already doing the type of enclosures and control techniques that we're requesting in the rule. One of the differences that we have is here in Southern California, these operations are not necessarily within a building. And because of that, the tendency to allow odors to escape is pretty prevalent. In other parts of the country, they are enclosed. Some of that has to do with either local requirements, and a lot of it back east has to do with the weather. So here's the location of the 5 power plants. We have Darling Ingredients. We have Farmer John, which a lot of you are familiar with. We have Coast Packing, which is a little less known, Baker Commodities, and D&D West Coast Rendering. Darling Ingredients is an international company, and they are actually revamping their rendering operation now and increasing their capacity. They will be totally enclosed, so they're doing what we've asked them to do. were what we're asking people to do that the board adopted on Friday. Farmer John, of course, they process pork. Coast Packing actually processes confectioner. They make like shortening, but they do have a small inedible rendering process. Baker Commodities takes a lot of different products from butcher shops and other places. And then D&D West Coast Rendering is only one of 2 facilities in the state of California that will take euthanized animals and animals that are killed alongside the roadway. So all these facilities really do, provide a beneficial service. But when you look at the predominant wind direction, which is towards Boyle Heights, we've heard a lot over the years from Boyle Heights about the odors. But there are other communities because the weather doesn't always travel in that direction. We have diurnal patterns at different times of year. So we have other environmental justice communities such as Huntington Park, Commerce, Vernon, Maywin, and Bell that also experience these odors. Yes, sir.
Tracy, is it just nomenclature? Because what happened to those slaughterhouses? That's essentially what we're talking about, correct?
No.
No?
No, we're not. There is a difference. Rendering is it can be integrated. That's what Farmer John does.
Yeah.
Farmer John does that. But the rendering operations is where they take the waste material and actually cook it down. When you make bacon in a frying pan, you're rendering the bacon. So what they do is these operations have cooking processes where they process the material, they cook it down, they separate the oils from the solids, and the solids can be compressed, dried, and used for things such as dog food. And then the tallow, the grease, can be used for, as I said, fully refined can be makeup, but it could also be used for biofuels. So there are other places that are slaughterhouses that they'll part the chickens, they'll part the cows, and then those parts are what's sent to these facilities. So our Rule 415 has 4 key elements. The first being best management practices. Those are ones that can be implemented in a matter of weeks. We have requirements such as covering trucks, limiting the hold time for raw materials that are received, because at a couple of facilities, the material is just delivered onto the ground and then pushed into the process. We have washdown requirements to try to keep the material within the facility so that when they're driving down the roadway, there's no odors that are coming out of the trucks. We also have those washdown requirements and fixing of pavement and cracks at the facility, because you don't want a buildup of material in the cracks and crevices on the ground that can then lead to bacteria development and then lead to odors. We have enclosure requirements as well. This applies to the raw material receiving, the processing equipment such as the cookers, and wastewater treatment. It's important to note that the raw material receiving and wastewater is really, at some of the facilities, is not enclosed. But that first picture that I'd showed in the upper right-hand corner, that's actually an enclosed receiving area. That's the kind of thing that we're asking folks to do. But we do have an option that they don't have to ventilate to a control device if they have a secondary odor containment. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. But with these buildings and these existing operations, it's not something that you can construct overnight. It takes time to do the engineering, takes time to get the engineering design, get the financing. They need to submit it to us. It needs to go through our permitting practice. And then we give them time to actually implement their designs to control the odors. And then we do have this alternative enclosure that I'll speak about. Another important element is something similar to what we have for our Rule 403 for dust, is that we're requiring them to put a sign on the outside of the facility, and we've had a suggestion to do it in Spanish as well, to let people know that there's a number that they can call if they smell odors. And then the facility has an option to include their own contact information. One of the things that we heard in the community, particularly in Boyle Heights, because we had a recent community meeting, is that a lot of folks didn't know that we had a complaint number to call. So this is one of our steps to get the word out, and we're working with our public affairs staff for some of these communities that have said that they just don't have the education about how to contact us if they have a concern or a complaint. So we're going to be working to get information out into the community. And then one of the last elements is a contingency odor mitigation plan. As I said, there's a number of times that we can't track odors back to a facility to where it amounts to a notice of violation, a nuisance. However, we can track some of those complaints back. Maybe there's not enough to take it to an NOV, but they have persistent problems over a long period of time. If they do that, we have requirements for them to submit an odor mitigation plan, and as a part of that plan, we'll require them to talk about where were the source of those odors and what are the additional steps above and beyond Rule 415 that they will do to minimize those odors. One element that I would like to point out is there are two different types of rendering operations. One is a continuous operation where it goes into a receiving bin, goes through a screw conveyor, gets crushed, goes through the cooking operation, and it doesn't come out until it's been separated between that solid and that oil. But we also have a couple of facilities that have what we call batch operations, which are actually manually loaded and unloaded. And those can tend to be some of the more odorous processes. But we did, as a part of this final effort to adopt Rule 415, is we went and met with all the facilities, talked with them, went and looked at some of their biggest concerns at the facilities. So what we did is we provided some flexibility within the rule that I think is one of the reasons why this rule is going to be successful. We have alternatives for best management practices, although we have a list of like 9 BMPs within the rule. If a facility has a practice that they believe can meet the objective and be just as effective, we'll allow them to propose that. We have an option for a closed system instead of permanent enclosure. That would be for like that continuous operating system, as long as they make sure that there's no leaks and they don't have any open elements of that continuous process through their cooking. We also have a lengthening of being able to hold materials for a little bit longer, a couple hours longer, if the material comes in refrigerated, and in some cases it does. We also allow additional holding time. If one of the facilities becomes inoperable, something breaks down, they need to move the material to another facility. So we have a notification process that allow them to do that. And then we have this alternative ventilation standard, which allows that secondary containment that I mentioned before. But then one of the other elements is the wastewater treatment enclosure. At a couple of these facilities, when you go there, I mean, you smell the smell of the rotting flesh, but the wastewater's got that pungent smell to it that really kind of sticks with you. That was the only time I actually almost threw up. So one of the key issues all along, even though we worked through a lot of these issues, a lot of it really boiled down to cost. And 2 of the facilities are going to bear the majority of that cost. But we believe that the options that we've provided within the rule, such as the closed system, minimizing the need for doing some of the repairs of the paving and limiting it only to the areas where material is delivered, and then allowing this alternative enclosure provision for raw materials where they have that secondary containment, that will actually minimize the cost quite a bit. So we've got some options in there that they'll be able to look at. And at the time of the rule amendment, we really didn't have any opposition from the facilities. The one facility that did speak, in a way, said that they could live with it and they would comply with the rule, although they still had concerns. But staff has committed to work with these facilities. They're all affected in different ways as a part of this rule. We'll provide guidance with them, work with them to make sure that they can come into compliance and try to address any concerns that they may have. And we're also committing to developing efforts to better identify the sources of those odors. And a couple of the facilities have actually offered their services to help us do that. And we're going to take them up on that. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Felipe?
Yes, 2 or 3 things. Since I do live next door to these places, one of them is across the street from Exide, which, anyways. But I really want to, thank the staff for doing this work and also for the board passing this resolution to control the odors. But I had a couple of questions regarding, I was reading some of the reports that you guys produced. Did you guys actually do a study on the amount of rendering that they do, like in tons or pounds, or the amount of days that they do it, the hours of operation, so forth and so on?
Well, some of them do. I mean, they can operate up to 3 shifts if necessary. We really don't have a good handle on how much they process because it does vary in terms of the pounds or tons, if you will, thousands of pounds a week that are actually processed. So we didn't really do an accounting for that. They do have to report their emissions, of course. Some of these facilities are in the reclaim program in our Title V facilities, so we do keep track of their emissions. But most of them operate up to 6 days a week.
Okay.
David? Or Felipe, are we done?
Another question on the issue of the wastewater. How are you going to be involved in the processing of the wastewater from those companies? As far, they have to meet certain standards, but is the AQMD going to be involved in regulating that?
Well, they already have requirements through LA County Sanitation District for putting water into the system. They have chemical oxygen demand requirements and some other requirements that they have to meet and demonstrate in testing reports to the sanitation district. Because if the water is of a much poor quality and they don't treat it before it goes in, then they're not going to be able to do that, and that'll have to be sent off somewhere else. So the LA County Sanitation District already has that well under control.
You're speaking to David, who's
Perfect segue.
One last
I'm
part of
sorry.
this question. I'm sorry.
It's David's fault.
So, are you guys going to coordinate with the sanitation district regarding the wastewater, or
No, we
exchange
don't.
information?
No, we don't really feel that we need to do any more than we're doing now. I mean, we see the reports, our inspectors see the report, but when it comes to regulating the wastewater, that's going to be with the sanitation district. But what we're doing is requiring them to enclose the wastewater because it's open in a DAF system to cover that, and the odors that are escaping from there, they'll have to vent that through an odor control device.
Okay, thank you.
David.
So coming from the wastewater perspective, maybe to sort of elaborate on what Tracy's alluding to, that when we have a facility like this and we're accepting the wastewater, we have to make sure that wastewater is treatable at the treatment plant. That's the perspective we're coming from. It's not
Right.
odor related
Right.
unless it causes odors at our facilities. So if it impacts our ability to treat the waste, that's where we start providing requirements upon the facility.
Mhm.
So with that said, my question really is something you said, Tracy, that piqued my interest as far as the complaints. I have no doubt this is very odorous, but it sounds like there weren't many NOVs. So
No.
is this something that's pretty obvious? There's a lot of odors, and it just for some reason there wasn't a lot of complaints to then validate the odor?
It has been very difficult for our inspectors to go out and validate. So, for example, an odor is smelled in Boyle Heights. When they go down and they trace it downwind, you've got Baker Commodities that's on the south side of Bandini. You've got D&D Rendering that's on the north side. The inspectors have to actually go upwind to identify those odors. Well, to go beyond Baker, you have to go on the other side of the LA River, and you just can't really discern the difference between the two.
Got it.
Farmer John, it's always been difficult because a lot of times it smells like maple. Darling is the only one that's actually gotten an NOV. They're a little bit off to the side, and we were able to trace one there once. But the majority of the time when we get these odor complaints, it is just very difficult to trace it back.
And the reason I'm asking is because I represent some facilities that can be odorous. We take wastewater, we have solid waste facilities, and we try our best to make sure we don't have any impacts on the community. But in reality, when we have a project that may not be popular with the surrounding community, sometimes people complain when it's not us. And it's really important to validate the complaints. I'm a little concerned as far as if we're creating a rule based on perception or not. It sounds like that's not the case here.
It's not the case, all right.
So it's just more of there isn't a
No.
trend saying, hey, we're going to start looking at odors and coming up with parallel rules for other facilities.
No. I'm not aware that we're going to do that. A lot of times, some of these things come up because of what we hear from the community, much like Paramount, in Compton. But this has been a longstanding issue for the community, and this unique odor profile is something that really needed to be addressed for the community's sake.
And then I didn't read the rule language, but as far as if there are complaints, is there a mechanism saying if there is a complaint, then I think you said there's a odor mitigation plan that's required. When's the plan triggered?
Well, normally for like an NOV, for an individual event, you'd have to have a certain number of certified or verified odors, right? Well, for what we've been finding with the rendering plants is it's hard to get up to that number. So if we have 3 verified odor complaints for 3 different odor events, so a total of 9 over a 6-month period, then we would require an odor mitigation plan.
Okay,
So it takes more to trigger than it would for an NOV, but an NOV has a much higher bar.
Staff is still validating that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, Tracy, I've been following the public comment period here on this rule with some interest, and I went back through my files, and came across a presentation that somebody on staff did to Home Rule back in February of 2013. And you said this has been a long-standing issue with the communities, but when I look at the complaint history from 2012 to 2013, from all the sources of complaints, not one of them is from a rendering plant. They're from asbestos, dust, open fires, overspray, smoke, and so on. And they're impressive. I mean, the number of complaints that the agency received through 1-800-CUT-SMOG, but not one of them you cited, not you personally, but the agency cited as coming from rendering facilities. So this can't be all that long ago.
Well, no, I mean, we have data that goes back to 2000 on complaint history. But in the last 2 years, we've had over 100 complaints where the inspectors went out and they or the folks that are on the line, on the telephone, have asked them specific questions. So we've had over 100 complaints in the last 2 years where it's related to what people identify as like a pungent cooking smell, a dead, rotting animal smell, the smell of death, and other descriptions. So we have been getting them in. Now, that doesn't mean that in all cases the description was adequately conveyed, but I believe that presentation was given by one of our compliance staff.
Well, I don't, nobody's name is on it, but as I say, I went through my files, and it is the district's presentation, staff's, one of staff's presentation, but whatever it was, it never made it to the level or rendering complaints by rendering plants never made it to the level of this presentation, at least, during that time period.
If I can just add that in that community, and I think Felipe will agree with me, is that they tend not to call in, even though there's an odor. And some of this is going back generations where it's just part of the life, and doesn't mean that they're not, experiencing these odor events. It's just that they tend not to call, which is, we're trying, and I think Tracy mentioned earlier, we're trying to get the word out more for them to call. I know that at Resurrection Church, Father John has a note in his bulletin on that. He's had it for years. But again, we just don't get those complaints.
Yeah, and we were amazed at how many folks in our public meetings said they didn't know about the 1-800-CUT-SMOG number. So that's why we want to do more outreach. No, it's true, and it has been in the communities for a long time.
And then I guess the last comment I'd like to make is, in addition to reminding me to check before I burn, it might not be a bad idea for the district to spend a few bucks and endorse animal rescue. Rather, there's at least one facility over there that takes euthanized animals, dogs and cats. And, by promoting animal rescue rather than going to a pet store, you might cut down on the amount of euthanasians, or at least do your part. Just a thought.
Well, I donate on a regular basis to SPCA myself because I'm a dog man. So, Jill, can we put that in the budget?
And I'm trying to get rid of my dog, so maybe I'll give it to you, Tracy.
Yeah.
Paul,
Tracy,
Yeah. Yes.
I'd rather give it to him. I don't want to have the guilt on my.
I have a couple of questions and a comment. One, does the rendering industry have an advocacy group or an association group? Because usually when rules are imposed on an industry that there's never been rules before, somebody starts squawking, or there's an organized movement of some type. That's my first question.
Okay.
And the second question, what Dave brought up was very important as far as your odor mitigation team. And a few years ago here with the chili pepper maker over in Irwindale, right?
Sriracha,
The sriracha, and I use that regularly because it's very good, but it was a politically motivated issue without going into the dynamics and of the complaints. Eventually, unfortunately, it took a long, lengthy lawsuit to bring out the characters, and it was politically motivated. We'll leave that one alone. But my comment to you would be, in the odor mitigation group committee analysis, is that gonna be public information? Let's say there's 20 complaints. Okay, who's complaining?
Well,
Something to that effect?
Well, Nancy could probably answer, but I think complaint statistics are publicly available. But let me get back to your first question,
Sure.
which is about, is there an organization?
Or an
Well,
advocacy group?
Or an advocacy group. Well, the advocacy group is really the city of Vernon.
Okay.
And it was through one of their business groups. They had recently, in the last couple of years, formed what they called, I think it's Vernon Green or Green Vernon, where it's a group that comes together that wants to be good environmental stewards.
Okay.
And it's something that came up. But before, it was really as a business group with the city of Vernon is where that group came together as a whole, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Generally, we will give you numbers of complaints and the areas in which they were made. We will redact the names of the complainants and any identifying information like phone numbers.
See, because Nancy, if I remember before, if you reached 6, then something came, that was
That's
a
a
magic.
policy.
Yeah.
It's not a rule. It's
Okay.
guideline for the issuance of a notice of violation
Okay.
for public nuisance. We will require complaints being received from 6 different households
Okay,
before we consider it to be a public nuisance, because the statute says it has to impact a considerable number of people. But we'll make exceptions to that when appropriate, like if the complaints are coming from a school or a business where there are multiple people.
Okay, any other questions? So Eddie. Go ahead, Eddie.
I just wanted to comment, there is a rendering association, there's the National Renderers Association. The reason I know that is because, of course, Tracy, Altair Paramount, we take tallow and turn it into renewable jet fuel and renewable diesel. So we're actually one of the beneficiaries of the tallow industry. I've only been here in my current role for 10 months, so I'm not sure why we get our tallow from the Midwest and not from our neighbors 15 miles down the road. But I can find out and share more information. But there is an association that is very active.
Yeah. I was speaking more for about a local, but you're right. The one of the rendering plants, a lot of their oil goes for biodiesel, so it's shipped out for that. The place that takes the euthanized animals, their stuff cannot be used in the country because it's poison. Yeah, trying to not be gross. So the oil that they use actually goes down to Mexico and is used as a lubricant on some equipment. I'm not really sure. But their dry meal that comes out of it can be used as fertilizer, as a soil amendment, and that's the best it can be used for. So I'm not sure why most of it comes. I mean, I know they process so much. I'm not really sure how the markets go.
Felipe, you had a question?
Yeah, let's say that this process gets started 2 or 3 years, and they start controlling the odors as far as putting the enclosures. And if we still have, those odors coming out, as this gentleman was saying, can there be something else that's also creating the odors? Because you guys don't really know. If you get a complaint, we've had people call and they say, well, we don't know where it's coming from. So let's say that we enclose all the rendering plants and the smell is still there, or a similar smell.
Well, kind of like what we did when we kind of started this operation, we had trained inspectors that actually went on a specified route to try to characterize the odors that they were smelling. And our inspectors are trained for that. So if through the end we implement this rule and all the facilities by all accounts are in compliance with the rule, but we still have a problem, we'll investigate. And if we need to take additional measures, we will.
Your mic.
Well, it's not atypical that once we implement a rule or over a period of time, if we're finding that there's other things that we did not address or something else that needs to be addressed, it doesn't prevent us from amending the rule and taking additional steps.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go to item number 6, which is the monthly report on small business assistance activities. That's just a report, no motion required. Any other business with the members? Seeing none, I'll go to item 8, which is public comment. Anybody in the audience? Seeing none. Our next meeting is going to be Friday, December 8th at 11:30. It'll be at Central Bosco. And we look forward to seeing you there. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting and thank you very much.